From the Center for the Study and Teaching of Writing, this is Writer's Talk. I'm Doug Dangler. After a 1993 attempt on Pakistan's K2, Greg Mortenson arrived at a remote mountain village needing help. What he found inspired him to co-found the nonprofit Central Asia Institute, and he has dedicated his life to promoting community-based education and literacy programs, especially for girls in remote mountain regions of Pakistan and Afghanistan. Mortenson is also founder of Pennies for Peace and co-author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, 3 Cups of Tea, one man's mission to promote peace, one school at a time. Welcome, Mr. Mortenson, to Writer's Talk.
Hi, Doug. Thanks for having me.
Great. I'm happy that you're here. I should be calling you, though, Dr. Greg, as the people often refer to you in the book because of your background in medical training.
So, well, I'm just Greg. My wife's got the PhD, so we'll call her doctor.
All right. Well, tell me about co-authoring this book with David Oliver Relin. What got you started on it?
Well, I've been working in Pakistan and Afghanistan for over a decade, setting up schools, mostly for girls in rural areas. And more people were asking to know more about the process. Also, after 9/11, there was quite a bit of keen interest in the area about how the lack of education or illiteracy was part of the component of what led up to 9/11. So I finally, I'm not really a writer, I guess. I take a lot of notes, but they're mostly financial records. And I drafted an original manuscript, 5 chapters long, submitted them to several publishers, and they said, the story's great, but the writing is horrific. So the publishers found a writer to help me out. I pretty much dictated everything on a tape, and then he helped write the book. It was a long process. It took over almost 3 years. The co-author came to Pakistan 3 times, and I had to, the most difficult part was putting a timeline together. So I actually finally put together all the financial records, which I have quite accurate records on, and we developed the draft and timeline from our financial records.
You know, I was wondering about that because when you're writing a piece like this that's going back a number of years, it's difficult to remember. And one of the questions that I'm always curious about for authors is, how do you remember all that stuff? How do you go back in a memoir? So it's mostly off the financial records then. That's really
once you start recalling incidents, you start remembering a lot more things. And then we interviewed hundreds of people that were there during specific events in the book. And what was interesting sometimes is you interview 3 or 4 people and we all had different recollections. So in that case, I left it up to the author to kind of siphon out or decide what he perceived had happened, because it's interesting how your recollections vary quite a bit sometimes with specific events.
Were there times you were surprised by what he came up with when he put all of those reconstructions together in the book?
Well, most of it worked out pretty well. There were some events where I also encouraged people where we had made mistakes or failed, or people have been very critical of our work. I tried to get their voice out as much as possible to get people who disagreed with us, and I think it came out really well. We also had to be a little sensitive with some of the names and locations, because our schools are being, are under duress or being targeted by the Taliban, so we had to use a little bit of sensitivity. The other thing that we got quite a bit of comments on, or even criticism, is that there wasn't mentioned enough about my own personal life with my wife and our relationship, but my wife deliberately asked me not to divulge and share too much of that. And we don't have any scandals or anything. We just pretty much have a marriage that, we have problems. We also were very devoted and dedicated to each other, and so my wife preferred that I don't talk about that too much in the book.
Right. Well, one of the things I noticed is that, as you said, there were times when things didn't go as you might have liked, and it strikes me that that's one of the reasons why this book has probably been chosen by a lot of universities as a first-year book, because you're talking pretty plainly about areas that didn't go well. I mean, the book starts in the first couple chapters with the descent off of K2, And I think the ascent on K2 probably it didn't really go as you had planned. There were problems, there was an injury, and then you came down off of K2 without reaching the summit. And I'm really, I get not surprised, but I think it's a really great theme to talk about. You know, there are failures, but there's also, you know, ultimately it led you to a very different goal, because you had started out as a mountaineer and ended up as a person working to create these opportunities for other people in schools.
Well, the irony, Doug, was that the first chapter in 3 Cups of Tea is the word failure. And when I submitted the original manuscript to New York to Viking Penguin, the publisher, they told me, they said, Greg, in the US you never start a book with the word failure. But I insisted on that because we all make mistakes and we all fail, and in order to succeed, I think we do have to fail sometimes. And in my case, specifically, it really was a failure that led to our success. And the other little bit of contention I had with the publisher was that they wanted the subtitle to be One Man's Mission to Fight Terrorism, One School at a Time. And so finally, I want it to be One Man's Mission to Promote Peace, One School at a Time. So I went to New York when the book first came, before it was published, and I tried to eloquently state my case. When I got done, they said, Greg, you know, in the US, only 1 out of 8 nonfiction books makes a profit, and 2/3 of all bestsellers are pre-chosen by the publisher. So we'd like to promote your book, but you need to be fighting terrorism so we can pitch the media. And although I'm a military veteran, I was opposed to that because I wanted it to be about promoting peace. And so finally I made a deal with them. I said, if the hardcover doesn't do too well, I want the paperback subtitle changed. So the hardcover came out in 2006. For a year it didn't do very well, and they changed then the subtitle to One Man's Mission to Promote Peace, One School at a Time in March 2007, and now it's been a New York Times bestseller for 138 weeks in a row. It's not just a subtitle, but I really think that there's a yearning in public about peace, and my perception is that fighting terrorism is based in fear, but promoting peace is based in hope, and the real enemy we all face is ignorance. It's ignorance that breeds hatred.